The Last Gold Roll, a quiet rift inside white California. It was the kind of conversation you overhear at a wine bar, tucked into the hills of a gated community. Two white men, both professional conservatives, sipping Pinot and reflecting on California's chaos with a sense of calm detachment. "The economy's never been better," one said. "For us," the other added with a smirk. Both were doing quite well. California's sky-high cost of living padded their salaries. Income inequality had become their golden parachute. They owned homes in safe zip codes. Their kids went to private schools with names that sounded like liberal arts colleges. And even though they called themselves conservatives, their vision of republicanism didn't include truck rallies or populist rage. It was about markets, tax cuts, and maybe well-timed donations to local judges. So when the conversation shifted to California's growing unrest, homeless encampments, open-air drug use, school board protests, they weren't worried. They were optimistic. "This will all come back to us," one said confidently. "People will get sick of the chaos and turn to order. They'll want our version of conservatism." The other nodded. "The working-class whites will come around. Let them take the heat for now. Eventually they'll fall in line, quietly, after the shouting stops." Neither of them realized that the base they were counting on had already left the building. Gold versus silver roll, the new California caste system. The phrase gold roll comes from the American colonial days in Panama, where the US-controlled Panama Canal Zone enforced a racially segregated labor system. White Americans, like maritime pilots, were placed on the gold roll, with higher pay, better housing, and access to prestige jobs. Everyone else, primarily black Caribbean and Panamanian workers, was stuck on the silver roll. In today's California, the metaphor still fits. The gold roll is the white professional class, tech executives, consultants, lawyers, developers. They've insulated themselves from the decay around them. The silver roll? That's the white working class, plumbers, contractors, mechanics, those still relying on public schools, local hospitals, and underfunded law enforcement. For years, both groups could coexist under a broad Republican umbrella, but now the rift is growing, and it's demographic, not just ideological. The silent flight of silver roll whites. The white working class isn't sticking around to be foot soldiers for gold roll politics in California. They're leaving, searching for the American dream. They watch their parents live, but they can no longer afford it in this state. They're heading to Texas, Idaho, Tennessee, and even New Zealand and Portugal. They're looking for affordable housing, functional public schools, communities that don't feel like pressure cookers. How can we measure just how many are leaving? Look at the public schools. Today, only about 20% of California's public school students are white. That's down from over 70% in the 1970s. That's not just a statistic, that's a population collapse. These aren't retirees or tech transplants. They're families with kids. They're the demographic backbone of any viable long-term Republican political movement. And once they're gone, there's no path back. The next working class isn't interested in tax cuts for the rich. Here's the part the gold roll conservatives don't get. The new working class, predominantly Latino, Black and Asian, is often more socially conservative than their white predecessors. But they're not nostalgic for Reagan. They're not here to protect low capital gains taxes or preserve legacy hiring networks. They've seen what meritocracy looks like, a rigged game with a polite smile. And they're not sympathetic to calls for moderation from professionals who built careers on insider access and tax shelters. This brings us back to Panama, and one profession that can serve as a bellwether for what happens to the privileged when power shifts. Panama's gold roll, canal pilots, a warning in retrospect. When the US handed the Panama Canal back to the Panamanians, the gold roll collapsed. White American pilots, managers and engineers, once the undisputed masters of the canal, were replaced almost entirely by Panamanian nationals. Today, nearly every canal pilot is Panamanian, trained, competent and homegrown. The old excuse? We're just more qualified. The truth? Panama, a nation of 4 million, found a way to build its elite, and it is working just fine. For them. The white Americans lost not just their privilege, but their excuse of merit. America's maritime pilots, the last real gold roll. In the United States today, Maritime piloting remains one of the last elite professions that's quietly, overwhelmingly white and male. Entry is tightly controlled, training is lengthy, expensive and often informal, built on networks and legacy placements. And if they don't like you, they can find a way to filter you out. Ask why there are so few Latino or black pilots, and you'll hear one word: merit. But we've heard that before. We heard it in Panama. And eventually, a younger, hungrier generation said, "We'll define our standards." So what happens when California's next generation, the one growing up in a state where 80% of adult voters aren't white, looks at maritime piloting, or real estate licensing, or judicial appointments, or other jobs of privilege? Do you think they'll feel warm nostalgia for how the system used to work for someone else? Or will they look at the gold roll and decide it's time to roll it up? Conclusion. What happens when the contacts don't call back? White professionals in California still have money, power and connections, but the political weather is shifting. The kids are gone and they won't grow up to be Republican voters. The public school pipeline of white rage is dry. They are no longer angry, they have become realistic. The white working class base has left not only the building but the whole state. And the next wave of voters won't be content with trickle-down representation. So when the state government no longer returns their calls, the advisory boards get reshuffled, the grants dry up, and the commissions are filled with people who don't look or think like them. What then? The real question isn't whether the gold roll will end, it is when the last frat boy puts down his clipboard. As for myself, being a silver roll worker in California isn't what it used to be. The gold roll offer isn't good enough, so my family lives far away from here, in a safe community with good schools. The riots? That's not my problem. The gold roll Californians will figure that out, or maybe not. If that made you feel uncomfortable, good, that was the point. As always, subscribe and tell us what you think.